Okay, I think we're going to get going. We're going to get started here. Good evening, and thank you guys so much for coming and joining us this evening to talk about sensory processing and modulation within daily routine. Lauren and I have had the privilege of presenting together previously, and so I'm excited that we get to do this again. This time we are gearing it more towards intervention and how we can help support our kids within different environments, including specifically the home. So as I said, I am Heather Hook, and I am Heather Hook, also known as Heather Fight. I was married a year ago, but in my professional license, it still says Heather Fight. I have been practicing OT, occupational therapy, for 10 years. I've been working at Eyas Landing for the last 7. I was the I am the occupational therapy lead and camp lead currently. And, I have been a part of Eyas and the growing community, as well as I also was in Bluebird Day and Merlin. So I've been a part of all of the realms, and I love every minute of it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren. I've been at Eyas Landing for the last 3.5 years. I'm currently, Heather and I are being co-leads right now as we start to navigate some of the shifts and things as our company grows, which is so exciting. Like Heather said, we've been around for a while. We're really happy to have you guys here and excited to kind of get our presentation started. So we're going to talk about first what we're going to cover in this training. So going over that outline, we're going to look at what is sensory integration. We're going to talk about the sensory profile. I'm sure that's a term you guys have heard. You probably filled it out, but what does that mean? What does that look like? What is sensory dysfunction? We're going to look at the different types of sensory interventions that can be helpful in addressing some of this dysfunction across the different sensory systems, and some of those specific kind of interventions or activities that you can utilize in the home environment to help your child get ready for their daily activities and kind of meet some of those needs to help support more of that sensory regulation instead of that dysfunction that you may see. We're going to go through our takeaway points, and then we're going to open up to you guys for questions to make sure that we can get all of those questions answered. And if we do run out of time, we do have our emails at the very end, so you guys can feel free to send those questions our way at the end of the presentation as well. So our objectives, we're going to dive deeper into sensory processing. We're hoping by the end of this, you guys will have a better understanding of the basic concepts of sensory processing, sensory integration, the sensory profile, and what that sensory dysfunction looks like across the variety of sensory systems. We're going to learn how that dysregulation presents. We're hoping that you guys will have a better understanding as well of how that dysregulation can really impact your child's function, their participation in their everyday activities, and their participation in general, and what they need and they want to do across their daily activities and routines.
So what is sensory integration, also known as SI throughout this presentation? Sensory integration is a theory linked to neurological processing and behavior. So it is that connection between the brain and the actual physical behavior that the child might and humans exhibit from day to day as they take in that sensory information from their outside environment and from within, and how they process and then react. Dr. Jean Ayers, who is an occupational therapist and education psychologist, describes sensory integration, SI, as a neurological process that organizes sensation from one's own body and from the environment so that the individual can perform meaningful occupations. So what this means is that they take in the information from their environment, comprehend, process in their brains on what it is, and then it's a feedback loop, and then they're able to then react to it in a hopefully successful way. And then it helps them be able to increase their overall independence and success and engagement within their activities of daily living. SI is the process that begins prenatally and continues throughout childhood, with the first 7 years being the most critical in development. As children interact with their environment, they develop adaptive or maladaptive responses to the sensory input they receive. Maladaptive responses also are, repetitive. When it becomes a repetitive thing, that's when it becomes maladaptive. If it's just a one-time response, maybe they didn't know what that information was. Maybe it's new information that they've never had to process before. But when it's become repetitive and maladaptive, that's when it can start really interfering with the child's life. So an example is a fire truck drives by and they cover their ears really quickly. That's an adaptive response to cover your ears. I do that sometimes because I'm like, it's loud, depending on how close it is. But a maladaptive response would be running away and screaming and having no awareness that that is not a safe choice. So why is this so important? Why is sensory integration so important? There are three main principles to SI. Learning is dependent on the ability to take in and process sensation from movement, the environment, and within our own bodies in order to plan and organize our behavior. If we're not able to take this information in and process it, our bodies can't respond to it in an appropriate adaptive manner that can, and if we can't do that, we have decreased success with engaging in our everyday lives. Those with decreased ability to process sensation also may have difficulty producing appropriate actions, which may interfere with their daily activities. Number three is enhanced sensation when incorporated in meaningful activity improves the ability to process sensations and therefore enhance learning and behavior. So the more information we can take in and process, the higher we can get to functioning, the higher levels of learning that we can achieve. We have a visual for that in a little bit as well that can help kind of enhance this understanding. Right here, the central nervous system pyramid of learning. I hope you guys can see this. At the very bottom, it is the sensory systems. So it looks at all of the seven sensory systems that are primarily known. There is an eighth that we will talk about as well today. But the sensations are olfactory, visual, auditory, gustatory, tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive. As you go up in the sensory pyramid of learning, central nervous system pyramid of learning, it gets higher and higher in different skill sets. You'll look at sensory motor development, perceptual motor development, and cognition and intellect. So the CNS pyramid has a partially hierarchical. So yes, this looks very hierarchical, but it is not just this as you go up, that's what happens. It is very variable. Children might have deficits in some areas and strengths in others, and it might not fully influence their ability to reach that top. It's when there's multiple areas within that central nervous system and within those sensory systems that might have some dysfunction and differences and different processing reactions that can cause them to have a harder time reaching their highest potential within that pyramid. The pyramid of learning is a visual which highlights how SI impacts the child's development, as I stated before. And if these senses don't function effectively, it affects everything else above it. And so ultimately affects the child's ability to learn and process and develop at a functional level. So as I said, there is 8 sensory systems. The visual, so seeing, gustatory, taste, olfactory, smell, auditory, hearing, tactiles, touch. And then the 3 that are less well-known are proprioception, which is a location in space, vestibular, also known as movement, and interoception is that internal sensation, such as your GI tract, your hunger, your fatigue. The sensory homunculus is a neural map that provides representation for how much the brain cortex is devoted to specific areas of the body. This is something that was created by Dr. Wilder Penfield and is a physical reflection of the body on the somatosensory cortex of the brain, which is the middle of the brain that connects the 2 halves of the brain together. And it allows the information, it allows the information to process and being able to relate the information to what parts of the body. And something that's really cool is this other visual that represents how much the sensory information is processed. So if you can see our hands process so much information. It takes in so much information along with our lips and our tongues. And we take in so much and we gather so much, and it stimulates our brain, and it stimulates different parts of our brain to respond to those different sensory inputs that we might receive in those different ways.
We're going to go through an overview of those sensory systems that Heather mentioned. There are 8 of them. Some of them are a little bit more well-known, and a few of them are a little less well-known. So we'll be able to help kind of strengthen your understanding of all 8 of those. So we're going to start with the visual system, or your sense of seeing, of sight. Information within the system is processed by the primary visual cortex. So you can see that image to the right. It kind of gives you a more in-depth breakdown of how that information is received by the eyes, how it is processed in the brain, and where in the brain it is processed. There are 3 ocular motor functions. Those are fixations, saccades, and pursuit. So fixations, the ability to maintain focus on a target. The saccades are ability to jump from target to target accurately when you're looking at things within your space, and pursuits, the ability to smoothly follow a moving target. There are 7 visual perceptual skills that kind of are further broken down within the sensory system. Those include visual memory, sequential memory, visual discrimination, form constancy, visual closure, figure ground, and spatial relations. We'll touch on those a little bit later with the dysfunction piece as well. Our next system is our gustatory system, or our sense of taste. The receptors are located within our mouth, our oral cavity, our tongue. They use taste transduction, neural impulses and pathways, and associated brain areas to process that stimuli. We have 5 senses, or 5 kind of different taste receptors within our mouth and our oral cavity that respond to those different tastes, including bitter, sweet, umami, or that savoriness, sour, and salty. Next is our olfactory system, or our sense of smell. So you can see in that picture there, it just kind of gives you a bigger breakdown. It's how we process that sense of smell. It's broken into 2 portions. The upper portion, which uses the olfactory mucous membrane to process smell, and then the lower portion, which helps bring that airflow down to our lungs. We have our auditory system, or our sense of hearing. So again, another visual just to kind of show you those different structures and where those structures align to get that information from what you hear in your environment through your ear canal and into the parts of your brain that process it. The auditory system consists of those 3 components: the outer ear, which is what we can see, that middle ear, your ear canal, and then your inner ear. The sound waves pass through the external auditory canal and vibrate your eardrum. You have hair cells that are actually located within that structure of the inner ear that are what respond to the sound. So those hair cells can trigger those neural action potentials that are processed by the auditory cortex within the brain. We have our tactile system, or our sense of touch. Those receptors give perception of touch, including pain and temperature discrimination. So they're kind of broken down into 2 separate groups as well: light touch or deep touch. So light touch, there's receptors that cover the entire surface of the skin. And when you kind of provide more of that light touch, it's really alerting. So you think of kind of like tickling the outside of your skin. It's very alerting. It kind of gives an not so comfy feeling to all people. And then you have your deep touch receptors, or the deep pressure, which are embedded in that connective tissue, and that tends to provide a more calming response. And again, we say tends to because everyone's system is a little bit different, but more generally speaking, that deep touch or deep pressure is calming to the body. So now we're touching on those 3 that are not as well known. So the proprioceptive system helps you understand your location in space. That image kind of shows that pathway, or that feedback loop that we were kind of talking about with that processing. So you feel this through your joints and your muscles. That information that you're feeling is then sent through that loop up to the brain, where the brain processes that information and kind of sends it back out to those muscles and those joints so that they know how to respond, and assists with that motor planning so that you can do the desired movements with the desired amount of force to accomplish the task that you're desiring. We have our vestibular system, so our sense of movement. It includes different parts of the inner ear and brain which work together to process that information and provide information to the body about where our head is in space, as well as that direction or velocity of that movement. The system affects posture, balance, your overall attention, coordination, and a handful of other things too. Now we have the lesser known one, or I would say probably the least known one out of all of them. So you can kind of see that little person right there, those different parts of the body. So this interoceptive system, your interoception, is the sense of oneself. So really your body's processing of that, what's going on inside you. So it includes things such as processing thirst, hunger, digestion, breathing, temperature, bladder and bowel function, pain, injury, and how it really impacts your emotions. Those internal cues and how you're able to interpret those and monitor those helps with that body's feeling of that just right sense within your own self.
So now we're going to touch base on a sensory profile. Something I wanted to mention too is we're all sensory humans. We all have sensory profiles and they all look very different. Most of the time though, our sensory profile does follow us throughout our lives. We just learn adaptive ways to work through some of our sensory deficits or strong reactions or sensory processing or modulation. We are all sensory beings. With that, a sensory profile is how a person processes and reacts to different sensory input is called their sensory profile. So I'm sure a majority of you, especially if you have kids that are at Bluebird Day, Merlin, or at Eyas Landing, have heard of the sensory profile. It is one of the occupational therapist's favorite evaluations to give out to better understand how a child takes in information and processes it internally and then reacts to their sensory information into that information. For instance, there are 4 different quadrants that a child can fall into or a person can fall into. It's that seeker or seeking, which is the degree at which a child or client or person seeks out that information. We see that a lot with movement. You know, our kids love to get movement, love moving their bodies. So they'll climb. Some kids really seek orally and they want to chew on something, and that makes them feel good. We have kids who are avoiders. I'm an avoider. I don't like loud noises. I've had to wear noise canceling headphones myself. But, you know, we have kids that and clients that we work with who have a really hard time with eating and they want to avoid the foods or avoid those loud noises or that busy environment. And so they'd rather be in a quieter environment and utilize different strategies to help them be successful within a louder environment. We also have the sensitivity and sensor, and that's to the degree at which they detect that sensory information. So if you are a higher sensor, you're going to pick up on that information. So you might hear that ticking clock that no one else can hear. You might hear that buzz in that light bulb from the LED lights fluorescent lights, or you might pick up on that little visual cue that was in the corner of your eye, and you just feel and register that information a little bit higher than others. And then there's registration and bystander, and this is the degree that you miss information. So these are kids who might not realize when someone's calling their name or when someone comes into their environment, and they need a little bit more cueing to really initiate tasks. There are also 5 different levels of processing these different types of quadrants. There is the much less than others, just like the majority of others, much more than others, and much more than others. And this just kind of lets us know at what level are they a seeker, avoider, sensor, or bystander when you guys are filling out that information. And it's always interesting. I've filled it out on myself. I know Lauren has filled it out on herself. And it's interesting when we think, oh, I'm a seeker, or I'm an avoider, and it's not. And, you know, and as we learn more information about our clients, we learn more about their sensory systems. A person can fall into multiple quadrants. And so for an example, someone might have a sensory profile in which they are a seeker of some information, such as that vestibular movement, proprioceptive, and deep pressure. They need those things to make their body feel calmer and more organized, but then they might be avoiding of the others, such as like that auditory processing or that light touch of tickles. A person can have different categories within the levels that they process the different types of sensory information as well. So this could look like one person falling into much more than others with how they process that tactile input, but just like the majority of others with how they process auditory input. And then maybe even much less than others for how they process visual information. So just because they fall into one type of processing within a quadrant doesn't mean it's going to be the reflective throughout their entire processing and their entire profile. And then also, just because a person may fall outside of a category of just like the majority of others, this does not mean that they have sensory dysfunction. Since sensory dysfunction is a repetitive reaction in a maladaptive way. And we're going to get into that a little bit more now. I do have a video that I want to share with everybody. I think I want to show the bigger one so it's easier to see. Can you see this one, Lauren?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. So they can't hear the video too well. It seems like it's cutting out a little bit. So we can make the link available as well for you guys.
So I'm sorry if you guys couldn't hear that very well, but what it's representing is a child who is in the city and has some auditory and visual processing and dysfunction because of how they're reacting to all of the stimuli that is happening. And the dysfunction comes from escape, running away, and then melting down and covering their ears. You can see he definitely just was so overloaded by all the information and input and sensory information in his environment that he couldn't regulate and couldn't modulate, and therefore resulting in him shutting down. We see this frequently with some of our friends who have hypersensitivity to different environmental factors. And, I think that this was a really great representation of just kind of what some of our kids might go through and what some of us might go through too. It's a human experience to get overloaded, but the dysfunction comes from him having that maladaptive response. And, the dysfunction is sensory dysfunction is when someone has a difficult time understanding and responding appropriately to sensory input that they are trying to process within their environment or within themselves. And so for him, he has all the stimuli coming at him all simultaneously, and he cannot process it all, and he can't modulate it. He can't figure out what to pay attention to or to filter out. And so therefore it becomes overwhelming for him and he shuts down. So it is important to note that sensory dysfunction refers to those patterns, as I've said before, but it's really important. It's not those isolated instances. It's when we see it repetitively happening where a kid gets startled by a loud sound, or really has a hard time with those new foods on their plate, or every time there's a new shirt that's not soft enough and it's itchy to them, or they're constantly seeking that oral information that they need the chewy all the time. But that it's, they're not chewing on the chewy, they're chewing on a pen and the pen explodes, or they're chewing on their pencils or their shirts. It's maladaptive is when it becomes sensory dysfunction. I found this visual is cute. It kind of gives an overview of some of the different types of things that we see and might experience ourselves, or you might hear your kids say is, I don't like to brush my teeth. I don't like bright lights. Some smells really bother me. I'm a picky eater. I can be clumsy and fall over things sometimes. I have poor gross motor skills. Sometimes I don't like to be touched. I like wearing the same clothes. I lose my balance. I crave fast spinning. Poor body awareness. I can be sensitive to too loud of sounds. I don't like to wash or cut my hair. I like to smell people and objects sometimes. I don't like tags on my clothes. I don't like to wear clothes. I enjoy being squeezed. I like the pressure. I don't want my hands dirty. I have poor fine motor skills. I get overstimulated and melt down. I get fearful and anxious sometimes. I overreact to minor scrapes and cuts. I cling to adults I trust, and I sometimes walk on my toes. But again, these are things that it becomes dysfunction when it's repetitive, when it is becoming a more natural response in a maladaptive way instead of an appropriate response to sensory stimuli.
So I think Heather mentioned that exactly too, that this dysfunction is not necessarily the response to it, but it's how this interferes with their ability to participate in these meaningful everyday activities, to participate within their different environments with different people in different settings and different activities. And that dysfunction really impairs that participation. So we're going to break it down a little bit further within these sensory systems and what that dysfunction can look like. We kind of touched a little bit on that idea of hypersensitivity, or being overly responsive, overly sensitive to those sensory systems or that sensory input. And then the idea of being hyposensitive. So that decreased kind of processing, that decreased sensitivity to that stimuli. So within the visual dysfunction, we have hypersensitivity, so that increased sensitivity to the visual input. That can look like processing lights as much brighter. So being really bothered by those bright lights, being really bothered by fluorescent lights, really noticing that change and not being able to focus, not being able to participate in the environment because things are too bright. And these are just examples, so it does not include everything. So I'm an exclusive list, but just to touch on a few. Being overstimulated when the environment is too much. So just a busy environment, lots happening, lots of people, lots of activities going on in our space. They might often miss eye contact with the people they're talking to. Hyposensitivity, so that decreased sensitivity to visual input, can look like complaining about seeing double, difficulty copying figures, shapes, writing from the board, or close point models. And these children people often fatigue easily when they're reading, writing, drawing, and those visual input, a lot of those different things happening. So it's just a lot to take in and process. So kind of continue, we talk about what that breakdown looked like in terms of those different skills. But the visual dysfunction can impact the following visual perceptual skills as well. So thinking about that visual and sequential memory, so difficulties with drawing, reading, letter formation, deficits with visual discrimination. So difficulties identifying shades of colors in a picture, symbols in math, some of those smaller fine-tuned things that we're just not quite able to pick up on as well. Difficulties with form constancy, so like being able to assemble Legos, those kinetic toys, all those things that are really bits and pieces that you're looking at, really, really hard time putting those together and looking at that model. Visual closure deficit, so having a hard time with puzzles, figuring out if you block off a part of something, it's still the same object, but understanding that and processing that with that part of it blocked off. Deficits with figure ground skills, so being able to look in your environment and kind of interpret what information is relevant, what's not relevant, shifting your attention between a far point model and a near point model, especially like handwriting or doing things from a board in a school setting. deficits with spatial relations, so being able to interpret directions, instructions, dressing, orienting clothes the right way, especially shoes, shirts, those things that have a front and a back, and positioning oneself on equipment. So just kind of understanding where your body is in space based on how you're processing that visual information. So we're also looking at what gustatory dysfunction looks like as well. So again, that same principle of being hypersensitive or hyposensitive. So hypersensitive, so that increased sensitivity, being really, really bothered by new foods or food textures, refusal to try them. You might see a more kind of extreme responses, such as a gagging or even throwing up when presented with those. So we have a really hard time processing those different textures, tastes, temperatures as well. They might spit food out if they don't like it. It's really aversive to have that in our mouth. You might see kids limit themselves to one texture, one taste, one temperature types of food. You might see hyposensitivity. So just that inability to kind of really process what we're eating and getting that satisfaction from chewing and swallowing and processing and tasting that food. We might have hard times kind of regulating that hunger because we just want to keep eating and eating and eating because we're not getting that same input as others might get from eating during mealtime. Olfactory dysfunction, so the same principles too. So hypersensitivity, really being bothered by those smells, really noticing people are wearing like a scented perfume, a cologne, cleaning products in the environment. If something's really stinky, like really not being able to get past that smell, they're very sensitive to what those smells are in the environment. They might move themselves away or refuse to be in that space, have difficulties at mealtime or lunchtime with peers when friends have different foods that maybe they're not used to and it has a smell, and just being really bothered by that. And you think how that impacts our attention. If we're really focused on that smell and what we're smelling, it's a hard time focusing on what we're doing in that environment as well. And hyposensitivity, so really, really needing that smell, wanting to go up to smell people, really liking that intense smelling soap, the perfumes, the colognes, all of those types of things. We're wanting to smell those. We're trying to seek that information to get that need met. Auditory dysfunction, so we're a hypersensitivity but increased sensitivity, so difficulty attending in a busy environment. If we hear someone and they're tapping on something and you can't focus on anything else because you're just hearing that person tapping on something, you're hearing maybe the noise from the refrigerator as that fan is blowing, you hear someone outside like a dog barking, all of those things that we're really noticing and can really impact our attention. Difficulty maintaining conversations or completing complex tasks because there's a lot going on that you're getting really distracted by something else that maybe others are not processing or perceiving in that environment. Or that hyposensitivity, you just can't understand in a busy environment. Things are really coming at you. You have a hard time filtering out what's relevant, what's irrelevant. That can result in difficulty following instructions, difficulty discriminating sounds. So what's happening in the background versus what's happening right with you in that conversation. These kiddos or people might have difficulty with hearing their name called in a noisy environment and being able to discriminate that piece as well. And tactile dysfunction, again, that hypersensitivity, increased sensitivity, they don't want to get messy. They're like, oh, no, touch something and it's immediately want to wipe our hands off. Like, nope, not going to happen for me. They might just refuse to participate in those activities in general, be upset, or when they see that mess. So again, that's kind of building in that visual system too, but perceiving that even if they touch it, like they're so aversive to it that even seeing it is really, really impactful for them. Getting really upset when your clothes get wet, or if it's raining or you step in a puddle and your sock gets wet, and not being able to focus on anything but that wet feeling on your foot. You see that difficulty with wearing different types of clothing. These kiddos or people might really tend to gravitate towards one type of texture, one type of fabric, one type of color, the way it feels, short sleeves, long sleeves, a variety of different things, because we're really sensitive to how something different feels on our skin. Or that hyposensitivity, have difficulties noticing that we're messy. We might have food mess on our face, our hands might be messy, our clothes, we just have a difficulty processing that because we're hyposensitive or just less sensitive to what that looks like. And that can also result in decreased or increased response to pain and temperature, because that tactile system is also helpful in processing those things as well. So you might see an under responsivity, so like they don't even notice that they're hurt, or a hyper over responsivity where it's very minor, but they just can't figure that out. You might see a lot of like someone, you touch them and they're like all of a sudden like touching them too, because they're really bothered by the way that felt on their skin.
Then we have proprioceptive dysfunction. This might look like frequent heavy walking, stomping feet, or climbing and jumping and crashing, like really looking for that deep input, enjoys the rough, high energy play, cracks their knuckles, enjoys that tight clothing. The lycra shirts or the lycra material feels really good on their body. Difficulty with motor planning and motor control. So because they don't know where their body is in space from that feedback loop, the ability to coordinate their body is becoming more challenging. And then difficulty with grading and calibrating the movements. So, those kids that will write really, really hard with their pencils, or just even so lightly that you can barely see it. Or when they go to hug you, they end up tackling you over because they can't figure out how to grade their force that they use with their body. And then this also can lead to decreased postural stability because they don't know how to write their body reactions to different movements in space, because that feedback loop from their muscles and their joints to their brain and then back is off. When we look at vestibular dysfunction, again, that's that movement piece. We have the hypersensitivity, where they have decreased levels of activity and they want to kind of stay still. They don't move too much in their space. They can get nausea or dizziness following that movement, or gravitational insecurity. That's one that we see very commonly, is fear of movement or being off of the ground. And so that looks like, I don't want to climb the stairs. I don't want to go swing. I don't want to go and climb up onto the playground. Those are kids who have gravitational insecurity. They can't understand where their body is in space. And so they want to keep their feet on the ground. And then we have hyposensitivity, where we have those kids who are increased activity level. We're seeking out that movement. We really need it. And they're constantly moving, hyperactive, and it leads to decreased attention and ability to participate and focus and attend to sedentary seated tasks. This can look also like poor discrimination or recognition of movement. So they might be moving and moving and moving and moving, and then all of a sudden it's too much, and then they become dysregulated from it all. And then also poor writing reaction of head or body. So they might be falling off, because they can't write that reaction because their vestibular system is interconnected and they can't move it back over in that to get their body right back in space. And then the interoception dysfunction. So when you're looking at interoception and knowing that that's how understanding what's happening internally in our bodies is, it can be a poor mind-body connection and a difficulty understanding what's happening. So this could appear with difficulties with toileting. So not knowing that their bladder is full and having frequent accidents, or interrupting cues of hunger and thirst. So they might think they're hungry, but they're really thirsty, or they might be really, really thirsty, but their body needs the water, but they don't feel that thirst. So they need that encouragement to eat or drink and give their body the nutrition that it needs. This can look and result in emotional processing and regulation concerns, because they're feeling different. Their body has different things going on within it, and they don't know what it is. They don't know where those signals are coming from. So they're reacting in an emotional way. This can cause also decreased sustained attention, because they are trying to process what's going on internally and they can't. And so it's causing them to bring all their focus and attention to where is this information coming from, and they can't find it, resulting in inattention. And then it can just lead to completion of challenging tasks. They can't get there. They can't get to that higher level of learning within that CNS pyramid that I had shown previously, because they just can't understand what's happening internally. So it is going to affect their ability to get to those higher levels. So some daily ways that we see sensory dysfunction and how it can influence a child's life is, decreased social engagement skills, decreased focus and attention, increased behaviors, decreased self-regulation, decreased emotional awareness, decreased motor planning skills, decreased executive functioning skills, a difficult time ability to completing ADL and activities of daily living and IADL tasks. And then also having a challenging time with learning and academics. So when we can't process our information and we can't process what's happening externally or internally, it will affect us on the daily and make it really hard to reach our highest level of potential.
So we're going to look at some interventions now, or just activities that you can do during your everyday home environment, social environments, out and about, just to kind of facilitate some processing of these different sensory systems to encourage more function, more regulation within those systems. So some visual interventions, games such as Bop It, Memory, Simon Says, different sorting and matching activities, games like I Spy, coloring different shapes or patterns, some ADL tests such as setting the table, setting up games or activities, gathering the supplies for those, jigsaw puzzles, connect the dots, board games, hidden pictures, different obstacle courses, gross motor activity. We've got some picture examples we'll show you as well. So you can see just kind of an obstacle course. We've got an I Spy, different board games that really challenge those visual perceptual skills. And again, these are just examples. You've seen some kind of range and difficulty and challenge that you're presenting, a connect the dots. So again, just kind of following that sequential memory, going through the pattern of it, jigsaw puzzles, a lot of categorizing and sorting, shaping activities as well. Those are things that we see and then you can do as a structured activity, but you can also bring it into your everyday life too. So doing things like sorting the laundry, putting all the socks together, putting all shirts together, things like that as well can kind of take a more everyday approach rather than just focusing on an activity as well. Some helpful tips with our visual kind of interventions or activities. Prolonged exposure to that intense visual stimuli. So you think like overhead lights, things that are quickly moving in our space, multiple competing backgrounds, really busy environments can elicit some of those sensory meltdowns. It's a lot to process in our environment, and that can become very easily overwhelming. So thinking about reducing the visual stimuli can improve that regulation, focus, and attention. So things such as moving to a smaller space, turning down those lights, maybe turning off overhead lights and working with just a lamp next to you, sitting in a partially vision occluded space, such as like play tents, things like that, that kind of help break out or reduce that sensory stimulation and kind of give you a more sensory occluded space to kind of help with that focus, regulation, and attention. So these are our next. We have our gustatory interventions, so things like exploring different tastes, different textures, experimenting with different cooking styles like baking, frying, thinking about those different temperatures as well. And on top of that, that exposure also building up that vocabulary. You think if we don't really have the language for it, if we don't really know what we don't like, it's hard for us to tell other people that. So if we don't know how to describe it, we might just have a big reaction when it's placed down in front of us. But if instead we can say, I don't like hot food, or I don't like smushy foods, you know, and building that awareness so we're able to self-advocate. Some other interventions, not necessarily food related, but drinking from a straw. So really stimulating those oral motor muscles, electric toothbrush, using that jewelry, that chew tubes to kind of get that oral motor input as well. We got some pictures here. So just kind of different food textures you can see there. We got crunchy foods, which tend to be a little bit more preferred. Not for everyone, but that's what we see a lot. Our kids, people gravitate to. It gives you a lot of that input. You got to really get a lot of feedback from crunching into it. But giving exposure to those different things you can do, as you see kind of in that weather theme, snack ideas, really play-based. Maybe we're not ready to eat it yet, but we can explore it. We can touch it. We can have it be in our space with us to kind of build up that tolerance. And then some just kind of different words you can use to describe that food to build up that language that we can advocate for our likes and our dislikes in a way that helps us stay regulated. So some helpful tips for this, starting small. It can be really, really overwhelming when you kind of are like, you hate mashed potatoes and someone plops a giant thing right on your plate, like you're going to be like, wait a second, you know, that's very overwhelming. So thinking about starting small when you're introducing these things, maybe putting like a little pinky sized dot of a dip or a different thing on there can really help with that regulation around that new or novel experience, because it's small, it's not as intimidating. So just keeping that in mind, like with that weather type of activity, just being fun with it. Maybe we're not ready to eat the broccoli, but the broccoli is a treat. And now you've got a little grape friend and you're like moving around and playing with it. And you think that any exposure, whether that's through touch, having it just kind of being on the plate, being in the environment, is really helping build that tolerance to those new, novel, intimidating things for our kids. Using that descriptive language again, so that we can advocate for what we like, what we don't like, so we can describe those things in a way that allows us to stay regulated in that moment and get that information out to the person we're with. And especially with some of these more food-related interventions, it can look small at first with that progress, but just being able to stay calm and regulated within our spaces is really successful, and that progress will continue the more you're able to work on some of these things. Olfactory intervention, so really tapping into that sense of smell. We've got lots of scented items that you can incorporate into play and activities, Play-Dohs, clay, markers, stickers, scratch and sniffing, sensory bins, slime. A lot of people like aromatherapy, so finding a scent that you like that you can put in a diffuser. Maybe you love mint, but you hate citrus. That's okay, you know, finding what helps you stay regulated and calm in that space. For a lot of our kids who are seeking this information and this input, incorporating these scented activities throughout the day, so it's not just like them going up and trying to smell you when you're wearing a nice, pretty perfume or cologne, can really help them process that information. Having lunchtime with peers or people who just have different foods, different smells, different things to process can be a really nice way to, not necessarily an activity, but a really social experience for them as well. And the same thing kind of we were talking about with those gustatory interventions, giving us that language to describe the smells that we're smelling in our space. So some different pictures of different scented markers, different scented slimes, different scented activities, different ways to play. You can do like pretend baths with babies, or even at bath time using scented soaps can be motivating too. Some tips for that, just kind of being aware of how smells within the environment may be impacting your child's ability to concentrate. If you're outside at a park and you're sitting right next to the garbage can, that might be really hard for you to focus on anything else but that smell. So just kind of bringing that awareness to what that is. And if you notice those things, your child probably does as well. Children who we talked about going up and smelling things, want to smell the food, want to smell the people, want to smell everything, might really benefit from some of these additional sensory activities where we incorporate that olfactory sense. We can get those sense of smell in there so they can explore and try those in a way that's a little bit more functional than going up and smell someone we don't know. Auditory intervention, so using visual cues to kind of support some of those auditory processing challenges. So thinking about the idea of multimodal learning. So for a lot of us, we don't really learn right from just hearing that verbal information. So how can we kind of support that information as well? Sitting the child closest to the speaker. So these might be kiddos who do great sitting closest to their teacher in the classroom rather than at the back of the environment. So they're able to hear that information and not have to filter out as much background noise. You can work on some different games or activities such as direction following games, guess that sound, guess the animal sound, playing with different sensory bottles, different musical activities, metronomes, clapping, you know, all the good musical things that tap into some of this as well. Just some pictures to kind of show what those look like, different musical activities, sensory activities, guessing the sounds. Helpful tips. So if your child is having a hard time kind of attending to verbal information, making sure you have their attention before you provide that instruction. If they're kind of looking over here doing their own thing, they might not be ready to receive that information. You're like, they're not listening. Well, you might not have their attention first. So making sure you have their attention before you give that instruction can be really helpful. And also after you give that instruction, kind of checking back in with them like, hey, well, what did I just say? What was the instruction? What are we supposed to do next? And making sure that what you said was heard by them and processed by them so that they're able to use that information. Some tactile interventions. We do a lot with sensory bins and messy play and just kind of building that exposure to some of these different feelings and things that we can touch. Maybe we hide things in them so you're looking and you're only using your hands to kind of discriminate what those different items are within it. Games such as guessing different temperatures, guessing textures, Tapping into some of that deep pressure tactile input through like weighted blankets or lap pads can help maintain that focus and intention, and different exploration types of textures and foods. Fidget toys to kind of keep our hands interested and get tactile input through our hands can help improve that attention as well. We got some different examples here, some fidgets, some putties, some different textures, some sensory bins, all sorts of fun things to kind of stimulate that tactile system. Helpful tips. So allowing your child to guide that information, so to guide that experience. So if you go up to them and you're like, here's some slime, and you put it right on them, that can feel really overwhelming. So just kind of presenting it like, hey, look at this. And maybe you present other things with it. You have like little scoops, you have paintbrushes, you've got different ways that they can still interact with that same material, but kind of reducing that intensity. So if you think if we really smush our hands on in there, it feels kind of intense. So maybe we start off with just poking at it. We have a really tiny little piece. And then again, kind of we touched on at the beginning, that light touch, that alerting touch can be really overstimulating for a lot of our kids, can put them into that fight or flight. And really you see this big decreased regulation. So that tickling, that kind of like almost like a feather on your skin is very alerting, does not feel so great all the time, especially if it's coming as a surprise. And important to note, especially with tactile stimulation, with all of these as well, but specifically with tactile, that some of these interventions that are tolerated one day or really liked one day might not be tolerated the next day. So really checking in with your kids, checking in with whomever you're kind of using these activities or interventions with to make sure that it is still something that they like, that it feels good to their body.
So when we talk about proprioceptive interventions, we're thinking about, practicing grading movements, going really, really, really fast, and then slowing ourselves down, jumping really hard, and then, okay, let's jump if we can jump really light on our toes. Fine motor play with manipulating objects, kind of Rubik's cubes or different types of fidgets that you can move around, matching left and right movements on different body parts, jumping, bouncing, crashing into large pillows, chewing crunchy, chewy foods, primarily in the back of our jaws to really give up that feedback back here, because that's that joint, right? The proprioceptive is that joint and those muscles. So when we are talking about crunching and chewing, it's back here, that heavy work. So being the teacher's helper and carrying those heavy books, being parent helper and carrying the laundry basket or pushing the laundry basket to where it needs to go. Weighted blankets are always really great. Animal walks, yoga, to really get those muscles and the joints activated simultaneously. So as you can see, the trampoline, crash pads, animal walks, scooter boards, yoga, these are all really great interventions that you can do at home. Something that I always is my trick for the crash pads is getting a duvet cover and stuffing it with cheap pillows. Costs 10% of what it costs for a true crash pad off of online. So if your kid loves to crash, that's an easy way to make one at home. Helpful tips: proprioceptive input has very temporary effect, but yet it is the most effective way to pair with movement, an efficient way to pair with movement. So it might be little, but movement is going to have a much longer. And when you pair it together, it's going to have a more integrated way and help your body to become more understanding of where your body is in space. And then incorporating proprioceptive input in short intervals throughout your day is the most effective than to do it for a long period of time at one point in time of your day. Vestibular interventions. So this is something that's interesting. It can influence your child up to 7 hours after the information has been put in. So a kid might be swinging and seem perfectly calm. And then 7 hours later, they are potentially still really calm, which is really, really awesome that information has been calming to them throughout that time. And so we want to be really vigilant of how much vestibular information that we were giving that child or to that person, and just really reading their body cues. So different interventions look like swinging, rolling, and bouncing on exercise balls, yoga balls, wiggle cushions during seated activities, obstacle courses requiring climbing, sliding, swinging, rolling, riding a bike or a scooter board or a scooter, like a scooter, and rocking horse or seesaw, rocking chair, pulling your child in a wagon or on a blanket on the floor. I always call it the magic carpet, somersaults or cartwheels, and then other games such as dancing or go noodle or Simon Says. So as you can see, here's some different activities that we utilize within the clinic, but that are things that you can get for home too. There are different swings that you can get that are on standers, that freestanding standers that don't need to hold in your ceiling, if that's something that your kid really needs. And there are collapsible trampolines. But some helpful tips is that rapid rotation, so spinning, can be excitatory. So we want to, if we're trying to calm our kids down or our clients down, we do a lot of back and forth linear swinging, and that can calm down and bring the child down, and become rhythmic. And whereas like that big rotary information is going to be heightened and we can increase the kid's levels. Depending on what they need, you might use one or the other. If vestibular stimulation appears to be too calming or too alerting to your child, to do something to elicit an adaptive response. So you might want them to do more of organized movement and paired with deep pressure and proprioceptive input following to then re-regulate and reintegrate that information that they just received. Interoception, so that understanding of self, consists of habits and routines to help us know what to expect. This helps the body to feel more organized and better able to modulate those internal responses. So learning how to go to the bathroom is, okay, we're going to go to the bathroom every 30 minutes to understand our body, and really using timers and visual aids to help potentially understand what their body needs. And then when we know what to expect of our body, is able to prepare for the sensation that will occur and organize this information. External organization or external organizing activities can look like deep breathing, mindfulness activities, heavy work, strengthening daily routines, modeling how to identify and interpret body signals and emotional responses by saying, oh, wow, you look like you feel hungry right now. You're eating, you're putting things in your mouth, or you're doing a little dance. Your body looks like it needs to go potty. Let's go potty. So body scan activities also can help to improve identification. So where's your body? Where's your belly? Is your belly feeling full? And just bringing awareness to that. I do realize that it is 7 o'clock. We do have more to go over. I don't know if we're allowed to keep going, Aiden, or if people would like to stay, but we can continue and finish through this and keep recording if that is okay with you guys. And if you guys need to leave, we fully understand. We just have so much that we wanted to share with you guys. Ruby had asked, would love to say, will the recording be sent out afterwards? I do believe so, to those who joined.
Yes, there'll be a recording. We'll send it out.
Great. So some example, the examples look like a daily checklist of, did you go to the bathroom? Did you brush your teeth? Did you eat? And kind of just allowing them to check in with themselves. Those breathing in, breathing out, being able to have descriptive words of body scanning descriptions of feeling hungry, feeling tired, feeling thirsty, and really being able to do a mindfulness scan. How is your head feeling? How is your heart feeling? How is your stomach feeling? And being able to pair those different body parts with descriptive words. And then also, where do I feel? Where do I feel hungry? Where do I feel thirsty? Where do I feel tired? And then even moving into an emotional realm of, where do you feel sad? Where do you feel scared? Where do you feel happy? It's really interesting. I've used that before, and with the kids, it's like, where do you feel calm? And they colored their entire person. And it was really cool just to see them be able to understand. And then like, where do you feel your anger? And they put it right in their head. And so it allowed them to not only process their internal feelings, but then their emotions too, which is really cool. So narrating when you notice these different physical sensations within your child's body can increase their awareness. So again, like I said, modeling, wow, I see you look like you're hungry. You're putting all of those things in your mouth. Let's go get a snack. Or, I see you look like you're really tired. You can't stay standing. You can't stay sitting. You're keep laying your head down. Let's go lay down. You're tired. It's okay. And saying it's okay, because it's okay to feel these things. These are natural things that everyone feels. And modeling the emotional responses, and even saying it also for yourself. Wow, mommy feels really hungry right now. I need to go get a snack. Or daddy's feeling really mad right now. He needs a break. It's okay to say those things. It allows kids to understand that these are typical, normal things that everyone experiences, and then will allow them to have that language surrounding those different experiences as well.
We're going to look at some tips for increasing sensory regulation. So we just kind of picked a few little activities to dive deeper into and what that might look like to increase regulation and preparation for those activities. So the first one is kind of the idea of getting ready to sit at a table, taking turns, participating in play, with the focus being self-regulation, focus and attention, emotional regulation, things like engaging activities where you're pairing that vestibular deep pressure and proprioceptive input can help increase that self-regulation in preparation for having to engage in some of those more cognitively demanding or challenging activities. So things such as doing yoga prior to maybe sitting down and playing a board game, getting some of that movement activity through jumping or doing like a dance activity like from Go Noodle can really help your body start to feel good. You're getting that input that's helping you increase that regulation so that when you get to that game or sitting at the table, you're a little bit more calm. Your body is feeling in that just right zone so that you're able to engage in some of those more challenging activities. And again, like we kind of noted before, just because an activity is calming and organizing to the child during one experience, it might not always have that same effect. So really tapping in with your child and saying like, hey, how does this feel with your body? Like, how are you feeling right now? And you can observe that too. Like if they're really looking through happy, engaging with it, noticing that and being like, hey, your body looks like it's feeling really happy to do yoga right now, or it looks like after we did a few yoga poses, you're looking a lot calmer. How does your body feel? So again, with that modeling and really connecting all those dots and pieces for our kids can be really helpful when they're kind of working to understand how those sensory systems work together within the body.
Something also I wanted to add on here is it's always really fun to do this as a family experience too, right? If we can encourage our kids by doing it together and making it family time, or if they have siblings, having the siblings do together and each one gets to choose a pose, or it's family time of which Go Noodle are we going to do next? And, or I want to create the obstacle course. All right, here's 5 pieces of equipment to create the obstacle course with, and making challenges and really kind of working together as a team and doing it in a family experience, we know has really beneficial results as well.
Yeah, it taps into that motivation. We're motivated to participate in some of these things that maybe seem a little bit less preferred when we're doing it by ourselves. When the whole group is doing it together, it makes it more fun. It's a shared experience that way. So the idea of getting ready to try new foods, putting on new clothes, brushing teeth, taps into the tactile, olfactory, visual, and gustatory processing and focuses on the modulation of those different sensory stimuli. So allowing that child to be an active participant when exploring these new foods, clothes, or when participating in those non-preferred routines. So the more that the child can take ownership and really participate actively in all those steps, so reducing the amount that you're doing to them and increasing the amount that they're doing within the activity can be really helpful. It gives that idea of control, and it also allows the child to modulate and engage with how much they want within that experience, so they don't feel like it's coming at them, that they have that control within it. Encouraging play using sensory bends to promote the exploration of these things. So again, building that tolerance for some of those different smells, different touches, different sights, some of those different things. It starts small and it may look small at first, but the more we can kind of engage with those and have your child be an active participant and you participating in it too, like getting messing with them, playing with those different things, modeling some of those things can create a more welcoming environment for them to try those things that maybe were non-preferred or a little bit intimidating. and then pairing light touch with deep pressure to help integrate that information. So maybe we're doing some of those different things, and then you follow by deep squeezes, you know, if we're playing with the sensory bin, or then we get those squeezes, or we play with it and we squeeze our hands together. We have a stress ball, we have some different things to kind of help integrate that information together. Our last one in this one is the idea of getting ready to be in an unfamiliar environment or going to a non-preferred environment. So these types of experiences can cause a lot of sensory overload. You think if it's novel, it's new, we don't know what to expect. Our body can't anticipate how it's going to feel because it's new. So that can feel really, really overwhelming. And those calming strategies that you can do, that deep pressure, some of that deep breathing, having some of those preferred fidget tools, or maybe their favorite weighted blanket, someone's a snuggly stuffed animal to squeeze, can be really helpful, not only in preparation for some of these activities, but during them as well, to give them the ability to get that input in a way that is functional and is supportive of their participation within the environment, still getting that sensory need met. And again, this will look different for each child. One thing that maybe works one day might not work the next day. So kind of trying it out and talking with your child and seeing how it makes their body feel in those moments can be really helpful to see if it's something that maybe will work on a more continual level, or if it's something that maybe worked once, but they really don't like it the next day.
Yeah, and something we also compare you know, these type of experiences with our social stories. I know that this is something that we utilize as occupational therapists a lot within our clinic, or within our individual sessions with kids who are going to be experiencing new and challenging things, or there's going to be a change in routine, or they're going to have to go to the dentist, or they're going to have to get a shot. And that's scary. You know, and they're feeling anxious, they're feeling that anxiety, they're feeling that fear, and they're going to have a hard time understanding their emotions. And then, as well as now, this is going to be an extremely sensory provoking and situation that they're going to go in. There's going to be all different sounds, different smells, different visual information. And so by utilizing a social story, we can really help prepare them and use pictures of real life situations that are happening, or real life things from those stories. So for example, going to a new school, taking pictures of the school that they're going to be in, the classroom, the school bus that they might be, or like the stop where their school bus is going to pick them up from, or if we can get their teacher's picture to put in there, the lunchroom, what it might, and then strategies that they can utilize to help maintain calmness is really beneficial for these friends, especially specifically when going to unfamiliar or non-preferred environments.
Yeah, and to kind of build on that a little bit too, those social stories paired with those real items, that you could do some of that role playing, that's some pretend play, like, oh, here's a doctor kit, try it on me, I'll try it on you, see how it feels, so we can have that experience to kind of like anticipate what it could be like. So that social stories paired with some of those pretend play items can be really beneficial in helping increase that familiarity, even though it's a novel place, it's a new place, a non-preferred place, helps kind of increase that comfortability with what to expect.
Exactly. So just a few takeaway points. We'll be done here shortly. Thank you guys for holding on. For those who have been able to stay, I appreciate you guys. So takeaway point number one is the brain functions as an integrated whole. So we don't just take in little tiny bases of information. We are taking in everything from our environment and everything internally. And we are processing this information and then reacting to it. Those are our responses, our behavioral responses. And the more we're able to process and modulate the sensory information from within and external, the higher we can climb within that central nervous system pyramid of learning, and the more things that we can do and the more successful we are within our lives. Takeaway point number two is that it is important to note that sensory dysfunction refers to patterns, not nice isolated incidences. This can present as hyper or hyposensitivity and to stimuli within their environment or themselves. So again, reacting really strongly, reacting in a negative manner multiple times is a pattern, and that's when it becomes dysfunction. When it becomes influential on your child's ability to fully succeed within their daily routines. And it's really impacting them in a negative way, or you in a negative way, or routines in a negative way. That's when it becomes dysfunction. And we really need to, figure out ways to help our kids adapt and cope to then process that, to processing that information. Takeaway point number 3 is that our sensory systems are influenced by our internal and external environments. So again, that information coming from inside of us and all of that information coming from our environments. We're taking it in all simultaneously and having to figure out how to process it. And then we've said this a few times, but just because sensory input is calming and organizing to a child at one point does not mean that it'll always be that way. I have this funny story. I had a kid who really loved shaving cream. It was calming, really excited. Like he would play with it. And it was really calming to him. And then all of a sudden one day he went and touched it, and then it was everywhere. It became really exciting to him really quickly, a totally different day. Also, some things that can kind of throw this off too is how much sensory information have they been receiving throughout their days? How many new sensations have they been receiving throughout their days? Are they going through a growth spurt? How did they sleep at night? Are they hungry? Are they tired? Are they thirsty? Did something else happen to them to throw off their sensory system? And so that could be creating a different response to what might have been calming for them one time, and then it not working the next. So there might be a lot to take into consideration when really utilizing these different strategies when working with your child. And then takeaway point 5 is to start slowly when introducing novel or more intense sensory stimuli to a child, and be vigilant in observing your child's reactions to that information. You're going to know your child the best, right? Your therapist are only with them for a little while. And so when you are implementing these sensory strategies, really understanding and watching and observing your client or your child and seeing how they are responding to this. Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Do you see a long-lasting response, or is it only a short-lasting response? Did it work one day and it's not working again the next week? And really diving deep into that and trying to understand your child as much as you can. But the slower you go and the steady you are, consistency is key too. So with that, I know we're over by 15 minutes, but if anybody does have any questions, we can stay and answer a few. You can either put them in the chat if that would be easiest, or if you do have other questions or concerns, these are our contact information so that you're able to send us emails too. And if you send it to both of us, we can also put both of our heads together and give you even more in-depth information. But I see that a parent says, my child covers ears in anticipation of a car engine starting and closes ears in the parking lot. Every other sound he seems to regulate well. Any strategies? Doesn't like to eat by touching his food, but can touch and feed mom and dad with weird face, wondering what's happening. So there's two different it sounds like some auditory processing. And I don't know if maybe this child has had a negative experience with like a backfire of a car or a really loud engine starting.
It was really surprising in the learning.
And so like trying to anticipate what that's going to be like. And so he's like, I'm feeling nervous. And so maybe talking through that experience with him while it's prior to it happening, while it's happening, after, and just, kind of, Abby.
I miss you.
Yeah, Lauren, we miss you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, and I think with the food things too, it's the idea of it going kind of anticipating him eating it and him swallowing, and you think that kind of is more intense than giving it to someone else and giving it to someone else's body, but thinking about how it's going to feel in his mouth, the taste, the temperature, all of those different things can be very kind of intimidating. So giving it to someone else can feel a little bit less intimidating, and just working on that tolerance and that small amounts and grading up that experience from there.
I see. Yep. Thank you.
And a lot of the times too, our kids like control, right? They like that control over what the experience is going to be like for them. And so if they can control the experience by feeding you, I think that that's something that's interesting to them. And, they've seen you feed them and they want to control it. They want you to feed, they want to do it. And so that's so typical, and it's good. It's fun, and you can make it fun.
We have another one coming in about strategies to help with hyposensitivity to eating, such as not recognizing being full. So yeah, that definitely that hyposensitivity with interoception and just kind of understanding those internal cues, things like doing some more yoga and those mindfulness activities to really tap in our connection with our brain and our body can increase that awareness too. The more we can kind of facilitate that overall increased body awareness. So just being aware of where your body is in space, how it feels to move your body can really help to increase that awareness of those internal systems too. The body is all connected. So the more we can increase that general body awareness can really help with this as well. And also depending on where your child is at and kind of their understanding of that, really describing those moments and what that looks like for them. Like, what does it look like for them when they're not recognizing their full? Are they stuffing food in their mouth really fast? Are they eating really slowly? And helping understanding that, oh, you're eating really fast, and maybe slowing it down can kind of help increase that awareness, create a more mindful interaction with that moment too.
Yeah, doing preparatory work before going into eating as well. So working on those brain-body connections prior to sitting down and eating a meal is really helpful too, to get your body ready. We can also do oral motor kind of stimulating activities where you use like a Z vibe and kind of really get that mouth started and that the sensitivity decreased. And so that you're giving that feedback and that information prior to when they actually start eating. And that when they're eating, how are they chewing their food? Are they chewing their food in the back of their mouth, or are they chewing it just in their front? Are they creating it's called a bolus, is when the food creates a ball before going down, or are they just like munching and then swallowing, munching, swallowing? And so looking at their feeding patterns too, and what does that look like for them? So feeding is very diverse. And if you have more questions, doing a feeding evaluation can be beneficial, because it could be not just sensory, it could be the actual oral awareness as well.
I think that's all the questions we saw in the chat. But again, our contact information is up here, so feel free to send us any questions that you kind of are processing through this and things come up as you're thinking about those things. We're happy to help send resources, kind of process through some of that information to make what we presented today usable and appropriate, applicable to some of your personal scenarios as well. Because we tried to cover a lot, but I know we can't cover everything.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for holding out for a little bit longer, and we really appreciate you guys. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.